You know the name Doug Poppa?
Yes, I do. God bless Doug Poppa, an honest cop.
I was elated, of course, but then as he testified, I was somewhat concerned for him, because I knew that they were probably going to crucify that man.
The top cop who put his badge on the line for justice.
One man who confronted truth and consequences.
Welcome to episode 40 of Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa for Friday, March 12th, 2021. Before I get to today's podcast, some breaking news. Las Vegas Justice Court Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson was to appear before a hearing of the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline that was scheduled to start on December 14, 2020. However, it was continued according to a public document filed by the Commission stating that Tobiason's counsel had requested a continuance of the scheduled hearing as a result of Tobiason's medical condition based on a letter received from Tobiason's physician dated December 4, 2020, recommending that Tobiason cease all professional/personal activities and encounters that may result in undue stress and precipitate cardiovascular symptoms. On March 10, 2021, the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline announced that a public hearing in the Tobiason matter has been scheduled to commence on May 17, 2021. On March 5, 2021, Tobiason filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline. After reading the document, I found that the filing contains false statements, inaccuracies, and many omissions. It appears to be a cut-and-paste job of the many motions that were filed with the Supreme Court of Nevada, which were eventually dismissed. There are some new revelations in the filing that I was not aware of that I will expound on later. Once again, Judge Tobiason in the current filing has doubled down on her allegations that she had received confidential information about the unsolved 2016 Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kaufman double homicide from Las Vegas Metro Police Homicide Detective Jared Grimet. Also in the civil action filing, Tobiason makes the explosive allegation that Las Vegas FBI Division Special Agent Kevin White discussed with her putting together a narrative of all the events leading up to and including the time frame of October 2017 so that it could be provided to the media and hopefully would force action on Special Agent White's then FBI investigation into police corruption involving some current and former members of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. The FBI at the time was also investigating longtime Las Vegas pimp and music producer Jamal Rashid, also known as Molly Mall, who was allegedly paying off police to protect his human trafficking operation and to target rival pimps. As I previously reported, Rashid's 12-year reign as a Las Vegas pimp came to an end in October 2019, when Nicholas Trutanich, U.S. Attorney for the District of Nevada, released in a statement that Rashid agreed to a pre-indictment plea deal and pleaded guilty in federal court to a single count of unlawfully owning and operating a prostitution business disguised as escort businesses. No Las Vegas Metro cops were charged in the case. Why Rashid was given a sweetheart deal from the U.S. Attorney remains unknown. There has been speculation that the FBI Las Vegas Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office may have made a secret deal with Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo, who runs the Las Vegas Metro Police, to not go after corrupt cops and also to protect Jamal Rashid's clients from exposure. Rashid was scheduled to be sentenced on March 10, 2021. However, his sentencing date has been rescheduled to May 5, 2021. If you remember from my May 2018 on-the-record recorded interview with Judge Tobiason, she claimed that she was providing information to FBI Special Agent Kevin White concerning police corruption, and that there came a time, according to Tobiason, when Agent White told her that then Assistant Sheriff Todd Fasulo of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department had called his boss, then Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Las Vegas FBI Division, Patrick Brodsky, that led to Brodsky to ordering White to cease contact with Judge Tobiason. Tobiason also stated in that interview with me that Las Vegas Metro Police Homicide Detective Jared Grimet told her that they had all the evidence that showed that Shane Valentine, Dominique Thompson, and Frankie Zappia were involved in the murders of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kaufman. Tobiason went further to say that there is a police cover-up in the murders and that the police may have destroyed evidence in this case. Tobiason stated that she was outed as a source of information by Vice Detective Justine Gaddis that led to the Land-Kaufman murders, and that it was her and her daughter who were meant to be killed, not Land and Kaufman. Listen up, people. All this is coming from the recorded voice of a sitting Las Vegas Justice Court judge, Melanie Andress-Tobiasson. Named as defendants in the civil action, Gary Vouse is a commissioner and panel member of the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline appointed by the governor. Paul C. Dial, I don't know if I'm saying it's right, it's Deyhle, is the executive director acting as general counsel, individual investigator, complainant, potential witness, staff supervisor, director of investigative activities by third-party investigators, and hiring agent and collaborator with the prosecuting office for the NCJD, which is the commission. Carl Armstrong is an appointed commissioner and panel member of the NCJD, appointed by the State Bar of Nevada Board of Governors. Joseph Sanford is a commissioner and panel member of the NCJD, appointed by the governor. Stephanie Humphrey is a retired State of Nevada employee. She is a commissioner and panel member of the NCJD, appointed by the governor. Jerome Polaha was a member of the commission at the time of the vote to issue the FSC and panel member of the NCJD appointed by the Nevada Supreme Court. Thomas L. Stockard III is a commissioner and panel member of the NCJD appointed by the Nevada Supreme Court. Bruce Hahn was a member of the commission at the time of the vote to issue the FSC and panel member of the NCJD appointed by the State Bar of Nevada Board of Governors. Adam Wignansky was the former acting investigator on behalf of the NCJD. Brian Hutchins is a retired State of Nevada employee. He is a prosecuting officer acting on behalf of and in concert with the NCJD. Thomas C. Bradley is a prosecuting officer acting on behalf of and in concert with the NCJD. Richard Dreitzer is a prosecuting officer acting on behalf of and in concert with the NCJD with authority and/or the tacit approval of the State Bar. Excerpts from the filing are as follows. The entire document is available for viewing on the screenshots in this podcast. Quoting from it, "This is a civil action for monetary relief arising from injuries plaintiffs sustained as a result of the illegal, conspiratorial actions of the defendants. Their actions are constitutionally violative and were deliberately undertaken to suppress the free speech of a duly elected judge and infringe on her due process rights through contrived, retaliatory means that abuse the process against plaintiff's rights as an individual, parent, and judicial officer. Defendants' actions are unconstitutional and directly restrain plaintiff's constitutional rights. The herein described actions would not have been taken against her but for the political nature of the speech in which she is entitled to engage as a mother, citizen, and judge. Moreover, none of the speech and/or conduct sought to be restrained or occurred while plaintiff was acting in a judicial capacity. The defendants and each of them have violated and abused statutes, regulations, procedural rules, and, in fact, created alternative rules and criteria in a concerted, coordinated effort to chill plaintiff's free speech and undermine and abridge her free expression and due process rights. The First Amendment problem is especially magnified here, wherein the speech is not only political in nature, but addresses concerns as a mother. There is no allegation that the statements she made are unprotected or even inaccurate, and certainly no allegation exists that these statements were made from the bench, on the bench, or even with regard to a case before her. The NCJD and individuals named all seek in some way to see the plaintiff sanctioned for free speech because her words were critical of the conduct of the government and its officials. Now I'm going to discuss a few of the claims written in the civil action. Just to note, none of the police officials that I mentioned earlier are mentioned in this lawsuit. Are not defendants in this lawsuit. In several statements that were made in Tobiason's civil action filing, I am addressed as a blogger. Tobiason's attorneys, Mark Cook and Thomas Sheets, have also addressed me as such in their prior motions to the Supreme Court of Nevada. Gentlemen, get over it. If it's intentionally done to demean my work and harass me, it's beneath your law degrees. Then again, maybe not, depending on your character. And by the way, I don't give a damn what you, Judge Tobiason, or anybody else thinks about my work. It is Judge Tobiason who wanted to get her story out in 2018 and expose corruption. I did just that, and have continued that to this day, and will continue to do so until we get justice for the families of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kaufman, and maybe in the process find out just what the hell is going on in Las Vegas with the FBI, the Las Vegas Metro Police, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the Clark County District Attorney's Office. Remember this in case you forgot. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution, freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Mr. Cook and Mr. Sheets, isn't that what Judge Tobiason's lawsuit is all about? Freedom of speech? So attacking a journalist seems a bit odd. And by the way, get your act together, gentlemen, because like I said at the outset, your filing contains many false statements, inaccuracies, and omissions. From 2015 until January 2020, I authored approximately 350 articles as an investigative journalist that were published by the online media outlet, the Baltimore Post-Examiner. I authored over 135 articles on the October 1st, 2017 Las Vegas massacre, more than any other investigative journalist in the country, and had appeared on national radio and television shows discussing my work. I broke many stories on the massacre that were not covered by any of the local media. In May of 2020, I started my own independent investigative journalism forum, the podcast Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa. Now, let me address some issues. Just to note here, Judge Tobiason's lawsuit references many things that I have covered extensively in the almost 30 stories I authored on Tobiason and the Land Kaufman murders that were published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner at the time, and more recently in many of my podcasts. So, for further clarity and background on what I will be discussing, you can access the online Baltimore Post-Examiner articles by an internet search, Doug Poppa, Baltimore Post-Examiner Archives. My podcasts are available at Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa, available free of charge on YouTube and Facebook, and on Rumble under D. Poppa. Before I go any further, on January 29, 2021, I published episode 39, titled The Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson Interview Uncut. It is the entire interview from A to Z that I conducted with Judge Tobiason on May 7, 2018. Included in the screenshots is the transcript of that interview that was done by the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline. A copy of that recording was turned over to the Commission by me in January of 2020. According to public documents filed by the Commission, that recording and the transcript was turned over to Tobiason and her counsel last year. Now, let's get to some excerpts from the lawsuit. I'm not going to cover everything in the filing in this episode, but I want to hit on a few things. I have substituted plaintiff for Tobiason. Entries 64, 65, 66, 67, 68 concerns Tobiason getting outed by Vice Detective Justine Gaddis as a confidential source of information. Quoting from the lawsuit, on October 25, 2016, at approximately 4:30 p.m., Judge Tobiason was contacted by Metro Vice Detective William Van Cleef, who had been present during an interview with the juvenile female and her police officer father. The juvenile female was the same individual whose name had been given to vice detectives earlier in the month as a possible victim of Valentine. Vice Detective Van Cleef told Tobiason that the vice detective, Justine Gaddis, disclosed to the juvenile female that plaintiff was the source of information, Tobiason that is, source of information, on the juvenile and Valentine. Tobiason, out of concern for her daughter's safety, then implored Vice Detective Van Cleef to do what he could to remedy the situation. After a period of time, Vice Detective Van Cleef contacted Tobiason and told her the juvenile female was asked not to disclose to anyone that she had been interviewed. However, within a minute of that conversation taking place, Tobiason's daughter received a call and was told what had been said to the juvenile female. Additionally, immediately after the interview with the juvenile female, Vice Detectives Van Cleef and Gaddis attempted to set up an interview with Tobiason and her daughter, which was declined. Approximately 8 hours after the interview, described in paragraph 64, took place, during which it was disclosed Judge Tobiason had given information to vice detectives regarding Valentine and his victimization of juvenile females, a double homicide took place. The victims were Kaufman, whose mother's house had been shot at several weeks earlier by Valentine, and Kaufman's girlfriend, Sidney Land, the daughter of a fire captain. On or about Friday, October 28, 2016, in the late evening hours, Judge Tobiason became aware that Valentine was believed to be a participant in the double homicide that happened 8 hours after she was, for a lack of a better term, outed by Vice Detective Gaddis as a source of information referenced Valentine. My comments. That is somewhat consistent to what Tobiason told me during my interview with her. However, some details have been omitted in the lawsuit. The Las Vegas Metro Police officer and his daughter Tobiason refers to as being outed to as a confidential source of information by Detective Gaddis was Officer Clarence Ty Bowden and his daughter Allie, according to what Tobiason told me. What is also admitted in the lawsuit and what Tobiason told me was that after she was outed, Tobiason's daughter Sarah and her best friend Allie came over to her house. Sometime during the night, Tobiason said Allie left her house and put out a tweet that she had been called in and questioned by Vice. Tobiason told me that resulted in the murders of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kaufman. However, according to Tobiason, she claimed that it was her and her daughter Sarah who were meant to be killed, not Land and Kaufman. Also, Tobiason told me that Allie Bowden was the one who introduced her daughter Sarah to Shane Valentine when they were still students at Bishop Gorman High School in Las Vegas. Judge Tobiason's husband, Sarah's father, Todd Tobiason, is a retired Las Vegas Metro Police sergeant. Tobiason, as I stated earlier, said that homicide detective Jared Grimet told her that one of the suspects in the Land Kaufman murders was Frankie Zappia, whose stepfather is a now retired Las Vegas Metro Police officer, Daniel Dano Giersdorf. We have a 4.5-year-old unsolved double homicide. Tobiason alleges a cover-up and that the police may have destroyed evidence in the case. Nehemiah Kaufman, the murder victim, was a pimp. Shane Valentine is a pimp. Dominique Thompson, a.k.a. Damo, another suspect in the murders, was the pimp to Frankie Zappia. Sarah Tobiason was friends with Nehemiah Kaufman. Sarah also knew Daniel Stewart, who found the bodies of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kaufman on October 27, 2016. Stewart is an alleged pimp. I don't know if Sidney Land was a prostitute or she was being groomed by her boyfriend to be one. What I do know, and I published this previously, was that Allie Bowden commented about Nehemiah Kaufman and Sidney Land in a social media text to a friend of hers. I will have more on that in a future podcast. She also admitted to being interviewed by the police. Everything I just said, I have said before multiple times. All what I just said surrounds the unsolved murders. It is worse than troubling. It stinks. A special grand jury should have been initiated years ago to investigate everything. In my opinion, that is never ever going to happen because Clark County District Attorney Steve Wolfson and Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo, who runs the Las Vegas Metro Police, are corrupt themselves and would never allow a grand jury to convene on that matter for fear of where it would go. It is not only what Judge Tobiason said about the unsolved murders. Take Tobiason out of the equation for a minute, and the fact that she received confidential information about the unsolved murders from Detective Grimet, even though that information was provided to Tobiason when her and her daughter had involvement with Shane Valentine prior to the murders. Let's forget about that for a second. Listen up, folks. I said this before, and I will say it until I am blue in the face. When Shane Valentine shot into Nehemiah Kaufman's mother's residence 3 weeks before the murders and threatened to kill Kaufman, Sidney Land, and Kaufman's mother, the police did not retrieve the bullet that was lodged into the bedroom ceiling. The single most piece of evidence that could link a suspect found with the firearm to the shooting into an occupied dwelling was mysteriously not recovered as evidence that day by the police, in violation of their own policy. After the Land Kaufman murders, which occurred at Sidney Land's apartment, after the crime scene was cleared, Sidney Land's father, Steve Land, went to the apartment to retrieve some of his daughter's belongings. Inside the same blood-stained room where his daughter was shot in the head and murdered, Steve finds evidence that was left behind by the police. He later turned that evidence over to Detective Jared Grimet. As a former criminal investigator, I cannot fathom that. It's beyond a disgrace, and it violates any known crime scene protocols. Also, Sidney Land's father is not a fire captain as stated in the lawsuit. He's a Clark County firefighter paramedic. That's no bullshit, people. That happened. I broke that story in 2019 for the Baltimore Post-Examiner. Do you think the Las Vegas media would follow up on a story like that? Wishful thinking didn't happen. Not one journalist contacted Steve Land other than me, that is. The Vegas media can report on cats up in trees, dirty restaurants, ghosts, and aliens at Area 51. but have largely ignored anything to do with Tobiason and the Land Kaufman murders. A sitting judge makes some serious allegations against the police and the FBI, but it's not newsworthy here in Las Vegas. If all that is not bad enough, it gets even worse. In April of 2018, homicide detective Jared Grimet and Mitchell Dorsch appeared on a segment of the nationally syndicated television program Crime Watch Daily. They released crime scene photographs to the program, which were aired on the show. That included, believe it or not, Sidney Land's body. They discussed DNA evidence found at the crime scene and talked about Shane Valentine. This was done on an unsolved double homicide where nobody has been charged with the double murders. I've never heard of anything like this. And the authorization for the detectives to appear on that show came directly from the office of Sheriff Joe Lombardo. Also, in 2018, Connie Land, Sidney Land's mother, gets a text message from homicide detective Mitchell Dorsch where he tells her in effect that the case was botched up from the start. Things that he had never seen before and were out of his control. I broke that story also that was published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner in 2019. There's a lot more, folks. It's so unbelievable it defies imagination. The Las Vegas Metro Police compromised the investigation of the Land Kaufman murders, and so did Judge Tobiason. She should never have asked for, nor should she have ever received any information concerning the Land Kaufman murders. Let's not forget the story that I broke last year on my podcast. Detective Jared Grimet, who was investigating the murders and continued to do so, his daughter once had a personal relationship with Shane Valentine, one of the suspects in the murders. The investigation was compromised at that point also. Let me make a comment here. As an investigative journalist, I follow the facts. I'm not a public relations person for Judge Tobiason, the police, the FBI, or any other person or entity. Judge Tobiason has lied about many things, and I have documented that many times over. She also told the truth about many things, and again, I have documented that. As for Judge Tobiason getting outed by then Vice Detective Justine Gaddis, I was the journalist that discovered a text message between Connie Land and Detective Mitchell Dorsch that confirmed Tobiason's claim that she was outed as a source of confidential information. On October 13, 2019, my story was published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner, titled, Exclusive, Las Vegas Metro Police Text Message Confirms Vice Detectives Outed Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson. Excerpts from my story are as follows. September 20th, 2018 text message obtained by the Baltimore Post-Examiner sent by Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department homicide detective Mitchell Dorsch confirms that Las Vegas Township Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson was telling the truth about being outed by vice detectives. The text message that was sent to Connie Land, whose daughter Sydney, along with her boyfriend Nehemiah Neo Kaufman, were both found murdered, shot in the head in their Las Vegas apartment on October 27, 2016. Dorsch texted, quote, "That interview was done by vice detectives who outed the judge in the interview. We believe that's when the judge became furious with the department and her tone changed and she would not even allow us to interview her daughter," unquote. On October 20th, 2019, I authored a follow-up story that was published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner titled, Vice Detective Who Outed Las Vegas Judge Transferred to Homicide. Excerpts from my story as follows. Metropolitan Police Department Vice Detective Justine E. Gaddis was transferred to the Homicide Bureau sometime after outing Las Vegas Township Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson as the confidential police source who provided information about dirty cops and prostitution fronts to detectives. Tobiasson claimed Gaddis's actions are directly related to the 2016 double homicide of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kaufman and put her life and her daughter's life in jeopardy. The Baltimore Post-Examiner attempted to reach Gaddis on Saturday, but was told by the LVMPD operator that Gaddis was not working on Saturday and confirmed that Gaddis works out of the Homicide Bureau. Although their base pay doesn't change, homicide detectives get an increase in their salary due to overtime and call-out pay, excuse me, which goes toward their retirement. The average yearly salary for LVMPD homicide detectives averages over $150,000 a year. Sheriff Joe Lombardo elevated Gaddis to a homicide detective. She now has access to the Land Kaufman murder case. As a former criminal investigator and undercover officer, I can say without any equivocation whatsoever, that for any cop to out a confidential source of information to a third party is a cardinal sin in police work and is dealt with severely in most law enforcement agencies, except apparently by the LVMPD, being Gaddis was transferred to the Homicide Bureau. I have to wonder how many other confidential sources of information and/or informants have been outed by the LVMPD. When Tobiason told Van Cleef that what Gaddis did was intentional, I would agree with Tobiason on that. What was Gaddis's motive? Was it just incompetence or something else? Maybe it was retaliation for the judge bringing them information because they were being paid off to protect the pimps who were running those illegal establishments. Keep in mind that the Baltimore Post-Examiner gave the LVMPD the opportunity to comment on Tobiason and her veracity of what she told us concerning the murders. The LVMPD never disputed what Tobiason said. As such, we can assume that what Tobiason stated was, in fact, the truth, and that makes for one troubling series of events in this double homicide investigation. Now, let's go to entries 68, 69, 70, 71, and 80 in the lawsuit. Number 68. On or about Friday, October 28, 2016, in the late evening hours, Judge Tobiason became aware that Valentine was believed to be a participant in the double homicide that happened 8 hours after she was, for a lack of a better term, outed by Vice Detective Gaddis as a source of information referenced Valentine. My comment: Tobiason told me during the interview with her that on that day her daughter Sarah told her that her friend Neo had been killed and that Shane Valentine did it. Number 69. Judge Tobiason then contacted Vice Detective Van Cleef, inquiring as to whether or not he was aware of any suspect information involving the double homicide. At that time, it was confirmed to her that Valentine and 2 other suspects were involved. My comment: so now Vice Detective William Van Cleef, according to Tobiason, confirmed to her that Shane Valentine and 2 other suspects were involved in the murders, and this was told to her right after the murders occurred, or the bodies were found. I will take a guess here. Those 2 other suspects, were they Dominique Thompson and Frankie Zappia? What's going on with these detectives over at the Las Vegas Metro Police Department, releasing this information to a third party? But I guess it gets even better on the next entry. Number 70. The following morning, Saturday, October 29, 2016, Judge Tobiason made contact with Homicide Detective Jared Grimet with regard to whether he believed Valentine was a suspect in the double homicide, which occurred 8 hours after Tobiason was outed as a source of confidential information. Tobiason was advised by Homicide Detective Grimet that Valentine was considered a suspect and participant in the double homicide. He also provided information that substantiated that belief, including, listen to this, significant cell phone activity and other evidence that had been gathered at the crime scene, including witness information and witness statements that placed Valentine at the scene of the double homicide and substantiated the belief he was involved in the homicides of Kaufman and Sidney Land. My comment: remember from my interview with Tobiason, she said Grimet told her that the 3 people who were involved in the murders were Shane Valentine, Dominique Thompson, and Frankie Zappia, and that he gave her information about DNA evidence. According to Tobiason, Grimet gave her specific details about the crime scene, cell phone data, to include witness information and witness statements that substantiated the belief Valentine was involved in the murders. I previously reported that according to public documents, Grimet denied to the judicial investigator when he was being interviewed that he gave any confidential information about the murders to Tobiason. Now, in this lawsuit, Tobiason double downs on that and then gives the specific details of what Grimet told her. I've said this before. I believe Tobiason is telling the truth on this one. I believe Grimet is lying. Both Judge Tobiason and Detective Grimet, in concert, compromised the double homicide investigation, if all this is true. As a former prosecutor and sitting judge, Judge Tobiason knew that she should not be receiving this information, and vice versa, Grimet destroyed the integrity of the investigation along with Tobiason. Number 71. On Saturday, October 29, 2016, Homicide Detective Grimet advised plaintiff that Valentine was a suspect in the double homicide. Plaintiff did not contact any other vice or homicide detectives as to this issue. Number 80. There was ongoing communication between Detective Grimet and Tobiason in the early part of 2017, wherein Tobiason continued to be advised that Valentine was involved in the double homicide. My comment: in 2017, Grimet was still providing information to Tobiason concerning the double homicide. He was still in contact with her. Why was Judge Tobiason so interested in the details of the double homicide investigation? Remember from a previous podcast, Connie Land stated that Tobiason provided information to her about the murders that she was not aware of, including information about DNA evidence that Tobiason said was coming from the police. If I was writing a textbook on how to jeopardize the integrity and compromise a police criminal investigation, this would be in Chapter 1. I have been working on the Land Kaufman murder case for now more than 2 years. There has always been speculation as to who the female was that was seen with Shane Valentine when he shot into the Kaufman residence. Now in the lawsuit, Tobiason and her counsel identified that woman as Alicia Jimenez. Jimenez, as I reported in a story in 2019, was Shane Valentine's girlfriend. I will assume that the identity of the female was more inside information that Tobiason had obtained. Reading from entries 61 and 62 as follows. Based on information and belief, the next day, Valentine had an argument with another pimp, Nehemiah Kaufman. During the altercation, there were a number of text messages exchanged where Valentine threatened to kill Kaufman and Kaufman's girlfriend, Sidney Land. Valentine also threatened to go to Kaufman's mother's house and kill them. In that text exchange, Kaufman gave Valentine the address and the gate code to his mother's house. A short time later, Valentine appeared at Kaufman's mother's house with the female, Alicia Jimenez, and rammed his vehicle into the garage door of Alethea Kaufman's house while several people were inside. When Valentine rammed the garage door, a piece of his vehicle fell into the driveway, which was easily identifiable as belonging to the vehicle that was rented in the name of Valentine. This incident occurred at approximately 10:30 a.m. on October 6, 2016. Valentine then picked up a very large boulder and threw it through the window of Alethea Kaufman's home. Valentine then fired at least one round into the home, which lodged in the ceiling or attic. There were 3 eyewitnesses that gave statements to the police describing the suspect, his passenger, and the vehicle. They also provided the vehicle's license plate. Metro learned the vehicle had been rented by Valentine. That case was closed less than 72 hours later by Metro for lack of sufficient evidence for prosecution. My comments. I always made sure when I was a cop that any document that was being submitted to the court was totally accurate in its content. I said this at the outset of this podcast that the lawsuit filed by Tobiason's attorneys contains false statements, inaccuracies, and omissions. You would think that high-priced attorneys would have their act together before submitting anything to the court. They just described the incident of Valentine shooting into Alethea Kaufman's residence as occurring on October 6, 2016. That is false. That incident occurred on October 8, 2016. It's Judge Tobiason's contention that the reason the police closed that case 72 hours later for lack of sufficient evidence was because the police were protecting Valentine. That's what she told me. I can't argue at that point until we get an answer as to why the bullet was never removed from the residence, as I stated earlier. It does give credence to a possible cover-up. In entry 63, they state, according to Connie Land, the night before the shooting at Alethea Kaufman's home, there was an altercation between Kaufman, Sidney Land, Frankie Zappia, and Valentine on the roof of the Red Rock Casino parking garage, where Valentine, in his vehicle, pursued Kaufman, Sidney Land, and Frankie Zappia in their vehicle and fired shots at them. This is also incorrect. Connie Land never said that as far as I know. The incident at the Red Rock Casino did not happen the night before the shooting at Alethea Kaufman's home. It happened about 5 o'clock a.m. on October 8, 2016, the same day Valentine shot into the residence. I also never heard that Valentine fired shots at the vehicle, only that he threatened them with the firearm, but maybe Tobiason has more inside information than I do. Entries 83, 85, 86, and 93 involved Tobiason's involvement with FBI Las Vegas Division Special Agent Kevin White. Number 83. In August 2017, Tobiason was introduced to FBI agent Kevin White, who was involved in an ongoing FBI investigation into Metro's Vice Unit that began in 2014. The investigation, which was still proceeding in 2017, was examining some members of Metro's Vice Unit and their relationships with alleged pimps and others entangled in the Las Vegas vice scene. Number 85. Agent White disclosed to Tobiason that multiple vice detectives engaged in sexual relationships with the witnesses in the Ocean Fleming case and influenced their testimony in that case and other cases. He also advised Tobiason that detectives were taking money from certain pimps, which allowed those pimps to operate, and that the detectives did not go after them and would instead go after and prosecute their competition. Number 86. Tobiason had multiple conversations with Agent White regarding her interactions with Metro Vice detectives. During those conversations, Agent White confirmed Judge Tobiason's fears regarding certain Metro Vice detectives and explained why the information Tobiason provided was ignored and disregarded by the detectives. My comment: White confirmed Tobiason's fears about certain Vice detectives, and he explained why the information Tobiason provided to Vice was ignored and disregarded by the detectives. That is all well and fine, but what was the explanation that White gave to Tobiason? These are very serious allegations. Number 93. During this time frame, Agent White discussed putting together a narrative of all of the events leading up to and including this time frame, October 2017, which could be provided to the media and hopefully would force action on this investigation. My comments: Entry 93 is pretty explosive. According to what Tobiason is claiming here, as I understand it, FBI Special Agent White, in concert with Tobiason, were putting together a narrative of all the events so it could be given to the media, and in doing so, would force action on White's investigation that he was already conducting. Am I missing something here? If this is all true, FBI Agent White would be facing some serious charges up to and including termination. It sounds like Agent White was being stonewalled by his own agency, which fits what Tobiason told me during my interview with her when she was discussing her contact with Agent White. Remember, Tobiason said to me during the interview that the Assistant Sheriff of Las Vegas Metro Police pressured the FBI Las Vegas Division to shut down White from talking to Tobiason, which she said then happened. I have to say this right now. Tobiason lied about a lot of things that could end up getting her removed from the bench. With that being said, I just can't believe that this story about White and the FBI is fabricated. You have to listen to my recorded interview with her in podcast 39. Tobiason doesn't sound like a person who is lying. Make your own determination. I also reported in previous podcasts that the Judicial Commission's investigator, Adam Wignansky, obtained Tobiason's cell phone records that confirmed over 100 contacts, if I remember correctly, with the FBI. Wignansky, in his investigative report that was publicly released in part, Wignansky stated that the FBI Special Agent, Kevin White, lied to him during his interview with him about his contacts with Tobiason that conflicted with the cell phone records that Wignansky obtained. I did an entire podcast on that. Remember, Sheriff Lombardo confirmed that the information Tobiason was providing to the vice detectives was never followed up on, and because of that, they had a murder at the unlicensed club, Top Notch, which is now out of business. After KLAS-TV, 8 News Now in Las Vegas, aired a segment of an interview they had conducted with Judge Tobiason in April of 2018, the very next morning, FBI Special Agent Vinitha Pandey contacted Connie Land and asked Land to turn over the burner cell phones that Connie Land and Ariane Zappia had used to communicate with Tobiason with in 2017. The FBI, according to Tobiason, had those phones, the FBI, according to Connie Land, had those phones for about 6 months before they were returned to Land. Query: why did the FBI want those phones? Was Tobiason under investigation? Was Special Agent White under investigation, or maybe both of them? Remember, Ariane Zappi accused Judge Tobiason of attempting to bribe her to change her testimony in the murder case. Was the FBI investigating that? There is a lot of information contained in this lawsuit that I have covered in numerous podcasts. I previously reported that Tobiason's former counsel, Dominic Gentile, last year, in 2020, stated in a court document that was publicly available on the Nevada Supreme Court website, where Gentile stated that the Judicial Commission was alleging that Tobiason was involved in purported murder plots. That's with an S. I uncovered that document and published a podcast on that. There are a few more things I want to cover before I close out this episode. I will have more on this lawsuit in a future podcast. Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kaufman's bodies were discovered in Land's Southwest Las Vegas apartment on October 27, 2016. According to Tobiason, the very next day, October 28, 2016, one day after the bodies were discovered, Las Vegas Metro Police Vice Detective William Van Cleef tells Tobiason that they have 3 suspects already, one of which is Shane Valentine. On October 29, 2016, 2 days after the bodies were discovered, according to Tobiason, Homicide Detective Jared Grimet tells her the same thing and gives Tobiason all the confidential information relating to the investigation at that point. It is now 4.5 years later, and nobody has been charged in the double homicide. I and the Land and Kaufman families want to know how those 3 suspects were cleared because, according to Tobiason, she says there is a cover-up and the police probably destroyed evidence in the case. I will say this again and again and again. This whole thing has the putrid odor of a garbage dump, and something is terribly wrong here. Just to drive this home one more time, listen to what I'm saying. Shane Valentine shot into the Kaufman residence on October 8, 2016. The police did not recover the bullet that was lodged in the bedroom ceiling that day. It stinks, and it does smell of a cover-up by the police. It violates their own departmental policy on the recovery of evidence at a crime scene. Had a person shot into Sheriff Lombardo's home, District Attorney Steve Wolfson's home, a cop's home, or any goddamn person of influence in this city, you can be the hell rest assured that that bullet would have been recovered as evidence, but it was not recovered from the Kaufman residence. Why? People, listen up. The bullet would have remained in that ceiling until hell freezes over. They closed the case 72 hours later for lack of evidence. They weren't interested in making the case against Valentine. Why? Apparently somebody told that crime scene analyst to not recover the single most crucial piece of evidence that could link Valentine, if caught with the firearm, to the crime. I have asked Metro for comment on this, and they have never responded. Why? Once they left the Kaufman residence without retrieving that bullet, the chain of custody was destroyed at that time. After the double murders, Homicide Detective Mitchell Dorsch found out that Valentine had shot into the Kaufman residence 3 weeks before, at the same time he was threatening to kill Alethea Kaufman, who was inside her residence with family members, and Valentine believed Nehemiah Kaufman was inside, which he wasn't. The point is, Valentine fired that weapon with intent to kill. Dorsch went to the evidence room to retrieve the bullet, thinking it may match the bullets recovered from the murder scene. But the only thing that was in evidence was the boulder that Valentine threw and pieces of his car that were left at the scene after he tried to ram his car into the garage. Point being, the crime scene analyst recovered those items but left the bullet in the ceiling. When Detective Dorsch found this out after the murders, he returned to the Kaufman residence with the crime scene analyst and recovered the bullet from the bedroom ceiling almost 3 weeks after the bullet lodged into the ceiling. At least somebody did some professional police work here. I'm assuming the bullet didn't match the projectiles found at the murder scene. Either way, if it would have been a match, a defense attorney would have had a field day arguing chain of custody. Why wasn't the bullet recovered on October 8, 2016? We may never get an answer on that. Now, continuing on. Entry number 104 on the lawsuit states, quote, on Monday, April 16, 2018, Agent White was transferred out of Public Integrity/Human Trafficking Division of the FBI and sent to the Opiate Squad. My comment. That was 4 days after the 8 News Now segment with Tobiason aired and 3 days after the FBI requested the cell phones from Connie Land. Is that just a coincidence? I know that Special Agent Kevin White was conducting an investigation into the Las Vegas Metro Police, separately and apart from what Tobiason said. I know he communicated with several police officers. Ariane Zappia stated she spoke with him, and I spoke with another former prostitute who told me she also had spoken to Kevin White. Entry 96 on the lawsuit. Quote, Agent White advised Tobiason he surmised that somebody had communicated with Connie Land and Ariane Zappia to intentionally undermine the FBI investigation and the relationship with Tobiason. My comments. If indeed that is true, that FBI Special Agent Kevin White told Tobiason that Connie Land had communicated with someone to intentionally undermine the FBI investigation and the relationship with Tobiason, then I have no problem right here stating that Agent White is full of shit and that is not true. Connie Land went to the FBI on her own and wanted them to take over the murder investigation because she felt there was police corruption surrounding the case. I know this for a fact and reported on it multiple times. I have the communication messages that Connie Land provided to me that corroborate Land asking FBI Special Agent Vinitha Pandey and FBI Special Agent Richard Smith to get involved in the murder investigation. Connie Land also went down to the Las Vegas division of the FBI and met with agents. So if Kevin White indeed made that comment to Tobiason, White is 100% wrong. Entry 97 as follows. In this time frame, unbeknownst to either Agent White or Tobiason, Metro claims to have ascertained search warrants for pen registers on Tobiason's phones in response to false allegations made by Ariane Zappia that Tobiason attempted to bribe her. None of that information was provided to Tobiason, nor was it provided in the course of the NCJD investigation, although the pen register of calls was disclosed. My comment. First of all, it has never been determined that Ariane Zappia's assertion that Tobiason bribed her is false. Tobiason is denying it, but just because Tobiason says it didn't happen doesn't mean it's true. Zappia said it did happen. If you remember from my prior reporting, and this isn't mentioned in the lawsuit for some reason, Judge Tobiason told me in a 2018 email that Las Vegas Metro Police Vice Detective Gregory Flores and Zappia's stepfather, retired Metro Officer Daniel Gersdorf, told Zappia to accuse Tobiason of bribery. The bribe allegation has never been adjudicated. They say that unbeknownst to Agent White or Tobiason, Metro claims to have obtained search warrants for pen registers on Tobiason's phones in response to false accusations made by Ariane Zappia. Metro's Criminal Intelligence Unit, according to public documents, as I previously reported on, had pen registers up on Tobiason's personal cell phone and home phone in the spring of 2017. They were initiated, according to documents, because Metro was investigating Tobiason at that time for interfering with the double homicide investigation. Someone, yet unknown, told Metro that Tobiason was meddling into the homicide investigation. It wasn't Connie Land, because in May of 2017, Land was still on good terms with Tobiason. Land didn't break off from Tobiason until late October of 2017. Further, Ariane Zappia stated the bribe offer happened in October of 2017. Tobiason could still be under criminal investigation, and if that is so, nothing to do with possible criminal charges would be released to Tobiason and or her counsel at this time, because Metro's possible criminal investigation, if there is one, has nothing to do with the Judicial Commission's administrative charges against Tobiason. That is my opinion based on my prior experience. Number 98. Irrelevant information from the pen registers was used in order to make false allegations against Tobiason in the NCJD proceedings and through quote-unquote leaks to third parties. To date, the warrants and affidavits used to secure the placement of pen registers have never been provided to Tobiason or her counsel. My comments. What third parties were leaked information? They don't elaborate on that. They just make the comment. If the warrants and affidavits used to secure the placement of the pen registers have never been provided to Tobiason or her counsel, that could be an indication that she may be under criminal investigation, and releasing the affidavits could compromise the investigation. That's strictly my opinion. I have no information if this is true. However, it is something that has to be considered. If the pen registers went up without court authorization, then there would be no affidavits. Police agencies have been known to conduct illegal telephone monitoring and wiretaps without the proper approval and thus would be violating the law, although I don't believe that is the case here. Entry 116 as follows. In May 2018, Tobiason was contacted by two former Metro officers, John Dukas and Robert Kinch, who had both terminated their employment with Metro under negative terms. Both told Tobiason they had been in communication with the blogger by the name of Doug Poppa, who had been doing an extensive series of stories regarding Metro's handling of the October 1st, 2017 massacre, and assured her that he was interested in her story and could be trusted. Comments. Let's set the record straight here. Okay. First, John Dukas, whose name is spelled D-U-C-A-S, not D-U-C-Z-Z, as stated in the lawsuit, and Robert Kinch are both retired Las Vegas Metro police officers. Robert Kinch retired as a detective as far as I know. I sure hope Tobiason and her counsel can back up what they say here. It is my understanding that Tobiason reached out to them. And further, they never identified me as a blogger to Tobiason because I wasn't a blogger. I was an investigative journalist, and still am to this day. They told her I was a former cop who writes as an investigative journalist for the Baltimore Post-Examiner, because Tobiason wanted to get her story out nationally. On Tuesday, Bobby Kinch gave me the following comment, quote, "That testimony needs to be changed. We didn't get terminated. We retired. We tried helping her. She refused, and so I stopped talking to her. We used to talk for hours. She would call all hours of the night. But she did her own thing totally against what common sense would dictate if one's life was in danger," unquote. Judge Tobiason, does this sound familiar to you? Quote, "My story and the information I have gathered has the potential to take down the entire legal and law enforcement community in Las Vegas. I would like to get it out there ASAP. If I had realized that this would never happen in the time frame they said it would in terms of indictments, I would have done this immediately after I was outed to Metro about my contact with the FBI. As a courtesy to their investigation, I did not go with my original plan, which was to write it all out and send it to every news agency in the country," unquote. If it doesn't sound familiar to you, Judge Tobiason, let me refresh your memory. You sent that to Detective Kinch before I ever knew who you were, when you reached out to him and other Metro cops for help. Entry 117 as follows. On May 6, 2018, Tobiason had a telephone conversation with blogger Poppa. That conversation was purportedly recorded, but no complete, unedited copy of the recording was ever produced. My comments. That is false. I had no such telephone conversation with Tobiason on May 6, 2018. On May 7, 2018, I conducted a telephonic recorded on-the-record interview with Tobiason that lasted approximately 2 hours. Tobiason and her counsel's assertion that the conversation was purportedly recorded is also false. It was recorded, and they know that. They say that no complete, unedited copy of the recording was ever produced. That is also false. I turned over to the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline, per their request, in January of 2020, the complete recorded interview. According to public records, that recording in its entirety was turned over to Tobiason and her counsel last year with a transcript of the entire conversation that was done by the commission. Entry 118 as follows. During the recorded conversation, Judge Tobiason made it clear to blogger Poppa on the record that the discussion was not intended to be published because it would include matters which could not be disclosed publicly. Blogger Poppa assured Tobiason he would honor that request. Comment. That is also false. Anyone can listen to the entire Tobiason interview that I conducted on May 7th of 2018. I published it in episode 39 a few weeks ago. We were never off the record during that interview, and I made it perfectly clear that I would use what she told me if I did a story. She replied, "Gotcha." When Tobiason admitted that she threatened Shane Valentine through his then attorney, she said, "Maybe we don't want to report that." Of course not. She threatened the defendant through his attorney. It went into the story. Entry 119 as follows. No complete copy of the recording has been provided by blogger Poppa to plaintiff Tobiason or to any defendant in this action. Comment. Again, not true. The commission turned over a copy to Tobiason and her counsel in 2020. Entry 133 as follows. On January 18, 2019, NCJD filed a response to the plaintiff's Supreme Court writ. 2 days later, blogger Poppa wrote an attack piece about plaintiff, Tobiason. Comment: false. No truth to it at all. I cannot believe that attorneys would submit a document to the federal court that contains total lies. What a disgrace. And these two law firms are high-end attorneys? They don't have a clue about what the hell they're talking about. 2 days later, I wrote an attack piece about Tobiason, they say. Really? If that was an attack piece, then Judge Tobiason attacked herself. On January 21st, 2019, the Baltimore Post-Examiner published a story I authored and titled it, quote, Judge claims FBI refused information on police corruption probe after pressure from LVMPD, unquote. The story contained Tobiason's exact words that she told me during the interview. So if Tobiason's counsel are calling that an attack piece, then Judge Tobiason, you attacked yourself with your own words. Entry 134 as follows. It was the first of more than 30 articles in which he sought to discredit Tobiason by misstating facts, printing any and all statements made about Tobiason without regard for their veracity, and made offensive allegations about Tobiason and her family members. Comment: may I suggest that they read all those stories again? I don't misstate facts, period. Prove it. I go where the facts lead me. On January 25th, 2019, 4 days after the other article, the Baltimore Post-Examiner published the following story that I authored that was titled, quote, Las Vegas judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson, who exposed police corruption, faces constant retaliation, unquote. Listen to this for a minute. This is the story I wrote for the Baltimore Post-Examiner at the time that was published on January 25th, 2019. It was titled, Las Vegas judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson, who exposed police corruption, faces constant retaliation. Las Vegas Township Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson, the first judge in the history of Las Vegas to publicly speak out and expose alleged corruption in the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and the Clark County District Attorney's Office, was immediately rewarded for her efforts by county officials. Not in your wildest dreams. Las Vegas lived up to its nickname of Sin City, and those in power wasted no time in attacking and retaliating against Tobiason. What makes it worse is that what Tobiason was speaking out against was what Las Vegas was built on, vice and corruption, the lifeblood of the city. Apparently, nothing has changed since the days when Bugsy Siegel first broke ground for his Flamingo Hotel. The only thing that changed were the faces of those in power behind this fake oasis in the desert. A sordid tale of murder, corrupt cops, human trafficking, underage girls recruited into prostitution, some the daughters of judges and police officers, and a county prosecutor's office handing out soft sentences to local pimps. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why. Money in corrupt cops' pockets, and God knows who else's. Corrupt cops become criminals wearing badges, disgrace their uniform, their profession, and their honor, which most likely they never had in the first place anyway. What Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson did was what those with testicles between their legs and stars pinned on their chest should have done years ago, but didn't have the courage to do so. On April 13, 2018, 8 News Now I-Team aired an interview with Tobiason, who recalled her efforts starting in 2015 to keep her daughter away from the clutches of a local street thug, violent felon, and known pimp named Shane Valentine. She started to collect information about an after-hours establishment that her daughter was working at. What she found out was that local pimps were recruiting underage girls like her daughter, including children of judges and cops, to sell sex. She recounted her efforts to reach out to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department vice detectives, but could not get any help. She realized that if the vice cops would have investigated her tips, they would have been investigating the criminals the police were working with. She also had concerns about recent plea deals for sex traffickers that were handed out by the Clark County District Attorney's Office. Tobiason said during the interview that she was concerned for her daughter's safety. Quote, "The problem is I don't think we're in danger from the pimps anymore. I'm more afraid of the vice detectives and those who are trying to cover this up. That's what I'm afraid of now." Unquote. I give Judge Tobiason an A for coming forward and exposing corruption. I give her an F, though, for allowing her underage daughter to even step 1 foot into those clubs. That to me is just plain irresponsible and something I cannot accept. Tobiason's husband, a retired LVMPD police officer, appears missing in action in all of this. On April 17, 2018, just 4 days after Tobiason's interview aired on Las Vegas television, Clark County District Attorney Steve Wolfson, along with Assistant District Attorneys Robert Daskis, Christopher Lally, and Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo, the head of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, had a secret meeting with Chief Judge Joseph Bonaventure of the Las Vegas Justice Court. The purpose of the meeting was to have Judge Tobiason removed from the criminal calendar and reassigned to civil cases, alleging that she was biased towards the LVMPD. Bonaventure did not reassign Tobiason. I found that failed retaliatory attempt by that group of men rather pointless, since Tobiason stated during her television interview that, quote, "It's unfortunate because it's a very small percentage of the people in the DA's office and at Metro, but it makes the whole entire system look corrupt," unquote. Not satisfied with their first attempt of retaliation, Judge Andress-Tobiasson in November 2018 would once again face the ire of those in power, this time from the Nevada Judicial Discipline Commission. In what I call the biggest load of crap ever to be dumped on anyone's desk, the commission alleges that Tobiason improperly used her position as a judge to contact Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department vice detectives regarding her claims of sex trafficking at an after-hours unlicensed club, which, according to Tobiason, was frequented by off-duty LVMPD police officers. Must have been the allure of the underage girls the pimps had inside those clubs. The commission's bullshit argument is that Tobiason had access to speak to the vice detectives and make those requests to investigate the clubs because of her position as a judge. I look at it this way. The police didn't follow up on Tobiason's request, and she was a sitting judge. I can only imagine how they were conducting vice complaints from a private citizen. Pardon me. They couldn't and wouldn't have followed up on anybody's complaints because they were being paid off by the pimps who were operating the clubs. Trafficking in underage girls, how can this be tolerated in any criminal justice system? It's a travesty of justice even in this city of sin. How about that for a perhaps more telling investigation? And what's been going on with the FBI federal corruption probe of the LVMPD? The FBI raided the Las Vegas home of suspected prostitution kingpin Jamal Rashid, a.k.a. Molly Mall, in April of 2014. Almost 5 years later, neither Rashid nor the suspected corrupt cops of the LVMPD have been indicted. What's going on, Federal Bureau of Investigation? In October 2016, a double murder occurred in Las Vegas, also connected to the sex trafficking industry. Sidney Land, 21, and Nehemiah Kaufman, 20, were found brutally murdered. Kaufman was an aspiring pimp. His girlfriend, Land, happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and she too was executed. According to police, Shane Valentine became a person of interest. That case is still unsolved. According to one source who spoke to the Baltimore Post-Examiner in 2018, Valentine was an associate of Jamal Molly Mall Rashid. Court documents obtained by the Baltimore Post-Examiner last year indicated that Rashid had several LVMPD detectives on his payroll for, quote, protection, unquote. Valentine is currently in prison on charges unrelated to human trafficking. On January 21st, the Baltimore Post-Examiner published Judge claims FBI refused information on police corruption probe after pressure from LVMPD. That story was based on an interview I conducted with Tobiason in the spring of 2018. During the interview, she described how after nowhere else to turn to for help, Tobiason made contact with FBI Special Agent Kevin White of the FBI Las Vegas Division. She says she was providing information to White about human trafficking, underage girls, corrupt cops, and murder. There came a time in 2017 when she claims Special Agent White told her that FBI Assistant Special Agent in charge Patrick Brodsky ordered him not to take any more information from her. S.A. White said Brodsky claimed Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Assistant Sheriff Todd Fasulo contacted Brodsky and wanted the agent to stop talking to her. Fasulo denied those claims when the Baltimore Post-Examiner contacted him. Brodsky did not return our call. Tobiason claims that the FBI is covering for the LVMPD. She said that Special Agent White told her, quote, "If I was in any other field office in the country and a local police department called my boss and were upset about me talking to somebody, they would tell them to go get fucked," unquote. She said White told her this was the only field office in the entire country where the local police department can call and complain and get an agent to shut up. As disturbing as those claims are, I have to say that something is still missing in all of this. That being said, as if there isn't enough in this entire convoluted story to accept, there's more. In June of last year, Dana Gentry, a former local television reporter, wrote an article titled "Laxall's Chief Investigator Pursues Case Against Daughter's Former Pimp," unquote. Judge Tobiason talked about pimps luring underage daughters of LVMPD police officers and Las Vegas judges into prostitution. But what Gentry wrote in her story completely moved it up a notch. According to Gentry, Roland Swanson, the chief investigator for then Nevada Attorney General Adam Laxalt, had previously led investigations for the FBI Las Vegas Division's Public Integrity Section. That's the same section that is supposedly involved in the corruption probe of the LVMPD and suspected prostitution kingpin Jamal Molly-Mall Rashid. Gentry wrote in her story that Swanson's daughter Hannah became a prostitute in 2010 while still in high school for Kobe Hogue, her pimp, who was also a boyfriend and classmate at the time. Hannah Swanson's eventual arrest on solicitation charges resulted in Hogue's arrest and conviction for attempted pandering. If you were writing a novel, you couldn't make this story up. Neither the FBI or the U.S. Attorney's Office in Las Vegas have ever admitted that there is a corruption probe of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Sheriff Joe Lombardo in 2017 told a local reporter that there was. Judge Tobiason claimed she had conversations with Special Agent Kevin White about corruption, so that would indicate that the FBI was investigating corruption as late as 2017. The Baltimore Post-Examiner has received supporting documents and testimony from an independent source which bolsters Tobiason's assertions about White's investigation. Stay tuned to the Baltimore Post-Examiner for that upcoming story. Like I said at the outset, that story that I wrote was published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner on January 25th, 2019. Just to note, the first news outlet to cover the Hannah Swanson story was done by the UK-based Daily Mail. The Daily Mail's Laura Collins and Chris White's excellent article that was titled "Heartbreaking Story of One Mother's Fight to Save Her Prostitute Daughter from Las Vegas's Seedy Underbelly" was published on February 21st, 2014, 4 years before Dana Gentry wrote her article. Like I said, that story was published over 2 years ago. I still stand by what I said about Tobiason being retaliated against by Sheriff Joe Lombardo and District Attorney Steve Wolfson, and that the initial investigation by the Judicial Commission was, in my opinion, for what it's worth, bullshit. Since that time, though, many other things happened and occurred that I have reported on. I don't filter my investigative journalism work. I go where the facts lead me, and like I said earlier, I am nobody's public relations firm. Anybody who has been following my investigative journalism work for the past few years knows that I have no respect for either Lombardo or Wolfson. In my opinion, they are both corrupt politicians, and I'll have more on that in an upcoming podcast. Judge Tobiason sent me the following email on December 14, 2018, concerning FBI agent Kevin White. Quote, "Kevin White said he would speak out if they ever came after me, and he hasn't done anything to help me or back me up. He knows the truth." Unquote. I will say this again, and I don't know why I say this because Judge Tobiason is a documented liar on many levels. But I believe what Judge Tobiason told me during the interview about the FBI. Something is really wrong here. Maybe we will get some answers. Maybe there is some hope. There is a new U.S. attorney for the District of Nevada coming in, and we have a new attorney general. Maybe somebody at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. will get involved and find out just what the hell's been going on in Las Vegas. My voice is so shot right now, so I will hit on a few more things and pick this up on another episode. Entry 134 as follows. Over the next months, blogger Poppa printed a series of escalating negative blogs. One blog included an interview with Connie Land in which she made egregious allegations against Tobiason. Another blog contained an interview of Ariane Zappia. Excuse me. My comment. Any story or podcast that I am involved with, if it's negative to anyone, it's because the facts led me in that direction. I don't have to explain to anybody who I interview for a story. Tobiason, during the interview with me, brought up Sidney Land's mother, Ariane Zappia, and Zappia's stepfather, Daniel Giersdorf, and others. Yes, indeed, I did do interviews with them. They have the right, as anyone else does, to talk and get their story out. It's called investigative journalism. Connie Land provided me with numerous text message communications between herself, Tobiason, and others that were the basis for some of my work. I have no use for anyone who would attack a mother whose daughter was brutally murdered and who was relentless in trying to get justice for her daughter, especially after being told by a sitting judge that there is corruption surrounding the investigation, that the police are covering it up, and evidence may have been destroyed in this case. That is exactly what Judge Tobiason has stated. What if it was your daughter or your son who was murdered? Think about that for a second. Anything Tobiason said in text messages and or emails that portrayed her in a negative light? Sorry, baby, it's your own fault and nobody else's. Tobiason is an elected official, a sitting judge, and as such is required to adhere to certain standards and ethics under the law. Entry 136 as follows. As the NCJD proceedings continued, blogger Poppa wrote about the case and escalated his attacks on Tobiason by including inflammatory misinformation which misconstrued the facts. My comment, more bullshit. Prove what you say. I back everything up that I said all the time, and what I say and what I wrote, every single time. And when I give my opinion, it's based on facts and my prior experience. It's called freedom of the press, boys. Entry 137 as follows. On September 16, 2019, prior to the notice of intent to suspend on a third and separate complaint received by plaintiff Tobiason in October 2019, Poppa wrote an article which included a statement that indicated he was aware that NCJD would be taking action against Tobiason in their meeting of October 18, 2019. Of note, the October 18, 2019 meeting was, according to NCJD rules, was confidential. My comment, another false statement that has no basis in fact. I wrote no such article on September 16, 2019. Please refer to the screenshot. On August 29, 2019, I authored the Baltimore Post-Examiner article that was titled, Judge Says FBI Agent Couldn't Trust FBI Las Vegas Division. Then on September 17, 2019, another article titled Unsolved 2016 Land Kaufman Murders Not on the Las Vegas Metro Police Website. The next article after that I authored was on October 1st, 2019, and that article was titled Las Vegas Massacre 2 years later and questions remain. Mr. Cook and Mr. Sheets, what the hell are you talking about? Produce this story that you claim was published in September 2019. I want to respond to your false allegation because this is just plain nuts. Do you even have a clue about all what's going on and what you're doing? Entry 139 as follows. It is apparent defendants were leaking confidential information to blogger Poppa. For example, he should not have known in September 2019 that NCJD would take action against plaintiff in its October 2019 meeting. Comment, this is a total all-out fucking lie. No, it's not apparent. Nobody at the commission leaked anything to me or ever gave me a document. Nothing, nada, zero. Cook and Sheets, you better come up with this story. Show me this story from September 2019 because it doesn't exist. You can take your stinking law degrees and use them for toilet paper as far as I'm concerned. Have you even vetted this document before you submit it to the court? Apparently not. The April 12, 2018 KLAS-TV 8 News Now interview with Tobiason is mentioned several times in the lawsuit. What Tobiason and her attorneys omitted from the lawsuit was the fact that Tobiason told judicial investigator Bob Schmidt in September of 2018 that that interview was never to be aired publicly. Believe it or not, that's what she said. However, that statement to Schmidt in September 2018 conflicts strongly with what Tobiason told me during the interview with her several months prior in May 2018. She told me during the interview that her attorney gave KLAS-TV authorization to air the segment, and she then told me that she wanted to do it 6 months before. Further, after that segment aired, Tobiason threatened KLAS-TV with legal action if they aired any more of a recorded interview. I know that sounds crazy, but that's the truth. Now, I'm not an attorney, so I'm having a little problem trying to figure this one out. Tobiason's attorneys, in my opinion, have thrown her under the bus, for lack of better words. The Judicial Commission is alleging that Tobiason used her position as a judge to obtain information about the Land-Kaufman murders and thus meddled into the criminal investigation. Tobiason's counsel, Cook and Sheets, in response to the complaint, stated that it is not true because Las Vegas Metro Police homicide detective Jared Grimet told judicial investigator Adam Wignansky that he did not provide any confidential information about the murders to Tobiason, nor did she request any. If that's what they are using in Tobiason's defense, then why is Tobiason doubling down and continuing to insist that Grimet did give her information, as you heard earlier in this podcast? If they believe Grimet, then that makes Tobiason a liar. I wonder what will happen if they both testify under oath at the upcoming May 17, 2021 hearing. Should be rather interesting. You may be interested in episode 33 of Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa, titled Podcast Shreds Judge Tobiason's Veracity. One more thing before I go. The Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline is the oversight authority for judges in Nevada and is a much-needed organization. Without it, judges would be running amok. Just my opinion on that. That's it for this episode, folks. Thanks for listening.